You know, we started this morning talking about transportation and safety and security. Then we went on to talk about chat GPT and generative artificial intelligence. And then that conversation continued around a resilient and digitalized workforce. And then now we talked about digitalization after lunch with Albert. And then we talked about the nuts and bolts of the implementation around digitalization. But I'm sure we've all seen that, especially in the last 12 months, as we emerge from COVID. How many of you have heard of the term AC3? AC3. I was introduced to this last month. We're now in 2023 AD. Yes, so we're now in 3 years after COVID, so 3AC. Yeah? And in 3AC, sustainability is a buzzword that everyone's talking about, very relevant, very important to all of us. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the next half an hour or so. But before we go into that, I'd like to ask my esteemed panelists to first please introduce yourself. Of course, I've already said who you are and who you work for, but tell us a little bit about your background. Maybe your zodiac sign, your date of birth, our favorite color. But tell us a little bit about yourself, starting with yourself, Jude.
Okay, good afternoon everyone at isang makakalikasang pagbati sa inyo. So, in behalf of my organization, the Philippine Center for Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development, I'd like to extend our gratitude for inviting us to be part of your equally important discussion. So, my organization is actually a non-government organization working a lot in terms of environment and sustainability. And case in point that it's very timely that we are invited in this session because we are promoting green procurement and greening the supply chain. As one of those, we are also the administrator of the National Eco-Labeling Program Green Choice Philippines, where we do a lot in terms of sustainability of products and services, among others. Likewise, we provide sustainability program for each and every company, be it government and private sector. Currently, we do some sort of consultancy with government on green public procurement in terms of policy development. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Melvi.
Thanks. So I'm Melvi. I work at the IDC, International Data Corporation. So IDC is a global market research and consultancy company. So our primary research is on the role and impact of tech in business, as well in the private sector. So my specific specialty is sustainability. And just to, I just met June now, but just to share that previous to IDC, I was working in the Philippines for the sustainable consumption and production we're the only ones probably understanding what that means, but basically that is integrating sustainability in our daily lives. That's SCP. So whether you're in a business sector, whether you're an individual, a Filipino citizen, consuming products, choosing products, that's SCP. So what we're doing is promoting that type of thinking in the Philippines because, as you know, I don't have to go far. William mentioned about, you were the one who mentioned about the typhoons, right? It's actually 24 typhoons a year. So, but I don't have to go that far. I can just go to the 2 weeks ago that's happening in the country, right? So we know the importance of sustainability. And so what we're trying to do in IDC is to help organizations understand how can you integrate sustainability in your business and how can you maximize technology to help you get into the sustainability goals. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Melvi. Norman.
Good afternoon. Magandang hapon. I'm from Eriksson. In our company, we drive limitless connectivity, which leads to limitless possibility. I've been in supply chain for 30 years, working through different multinational companies, been assigned to different countries also. recently, and even in my previous work, I've been part of APAC leadership teams where we drive sustainability as a key strategy, among other things. So this is very close to heart. I'd like to share what I know. I'd like to learn new things from my peers in the panel group.
Thank you, Norman. William?
My test. Yeah, so Willy Changbian, we're in the supply chain business nationally. When it comes to basically sustainability, I think our perspective is that the cleaner and greener we get, the sooner that happens, then the next generation of Filipinos in the ASEAN will have a much, much better life ahead of them in terms of health and wellness. Not a motherhood statement. One of our heads basically mentioned one thing. A lot of times parents talk about leaving some kind of financial legacy for their children. One of our seniors goes, today we need to leave and or give way and options to a better environment. That's something that is important to the next generation and generations after. We agree with that, and therefore every opportunity we get in this particular business, we are trying our best. In fact, outside I saw a truck that one of our teammates drove. It's an EV. And we are really looking into maximizing the use of EVs because we believe that the less carbon footprint we put in today is an investment in our kids' futures tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you very much, William. You know, when I hear these sort of motherhood statements from a lot of industry professionals, I tend to take it with a pinch of salt. But after having listened to you for the last half an hour or so, I'm actually convinced that you actually believe what you're saying. So kudos to you. Let's break down the title a bit. Driving Sustainability Through a Robust Supply Chain Ecosystem. Norman, I'm going to start with you. Yeah? What does a robust supply chain mean to you? What does that mean? What's the takeaway to the audience?
Sure. Robust supply chain is not necessarily a fast one. What I've learned is it needs to be reliable, predictable yet agile, needs to be cost efficient, transparent. Nowadays, it needs to be resilient. And then finally, it needs to be sustainable. So if you have that good mix of all of those elements in a supply chain, that's not just robust. That's a kick-ass supply chain.
Oh, very good. Well said, Norman. So, William, based on what you've just heard, yeah, and based on your experience and insights as well, do you think that a robust supply chain system is critical to support Philippine economic growth, right?
Definitely, because one of the things that drives, I think, a developing country is the need to rationalize costs. Direct costs everyone sees, but degradation of your everyday life is also bad. Like, fortunately today you step out, the plastics that we use for our day-to-day goods. We are a sachet economy because that allows affordability. So we need to think about the economic benefits of the sachet and potentially what are the things we can do pressing forward. Without, let's say, any robustness defined by, for example, I think you mentioned visibility, transparency, information, then it's all going to go back to, well, we gave money to this, sorry, apologies, June, but, well, we gave money to our favorite NGO. I think real sustainability has to impact you when you, on your day-to-day. But without again, the flywheel of quantitatively defining where you want to be or where you are, it's very difficult. So hopefully we get better at measurements. That will create, I think, then we can call it robust. It will get better as we move on, bringing, again, really more the whole concept of shared. The whole shared service experience that you see in cars, Airbnb, Grab. We need to have that concept as well, even in the supply chains.
Thank you, William. So staying with you, William, and then coming followed by yourself, Norman. The next question for you, William. So at this stage in the supply chain industry, right, what are your views? Because you are mainly a Philippine domestic player, right? 7,000 islands. I think we saw earlier, said you have 94% or 98% coverage in the Philippines. The 3PL players that we have within the Philippines, are they ready to be contributing to this robust ecosystem?
I believe so, actually. Most of our competition are the names you mentioned earlier. We speak to each other. We hate each other in the field, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to get together and agree on certain. We need to agree on certain things. The use of infrastructure, the use of what I would say pushed supply chain, where you can have more, let's say, the distribution centers that are not for one user. June had mentioned earlier the greening of the chains. So you can imagine if farmers, whether for fruit and veg or let's say meat, are able to go to a distribution center that also does packaging and or manufacturing, that's where the opportunities lie for robustness. Now, we go it alone, we spend everything, we'll probably lose money for the first 3 to 5 years. We go it together, we fight each other, we become so competitive, I think the market will grow rather than decrease. But I might have a cockeyed optimist's perspective, but that's how I see it. We fight in certain parts of the arena, but we collaborate when it hurts the wallet.
No, very good. What about yourself, Norman? Looking at it from a shipper's lens, yeah? What's your perspective on that?
So if the question is in the local context, do I find 3PLs robust? Certainly they are. There are, of course, differences from one country to the other, because I can say for a fact the performance of Philippine 3PLs versus Singapore and other countries. But what I'd like to say is it's not a stand-alone assessment. I mean, you cannot just judge a 3PL being robust. It needs to be the combined output of the shipper and the 3PL. I mean, we always say it's end-to-end. So the upstream work that a shipper does around demand planning, forecasting, ensuring all containers are filled, that contributes a lot to the robustness of the execution of the 3PL. And then we partner with the digitization elements or components of the 3PL to make that part of the supply chain more transparent, easy to navigate, and hopefully easy to manage.
So aside from it hurting you in the wallet, like what William said, yeah? So you think that shippers and service providers in the Philippines are ready to collaborate?
Oh, absolutely. It's a necessity rather than a nice to have.
Okay. Turning to you, June. Because your focus is around the circular economy and waste management, yeah? Is this also an area that you think there's interest from both shippers and service providers within the Philippines?
Well, let me just give you first a perspective of a circular economy, because this might be the first time that you encounter the term. But comparing it to the linear economy that we produce, we use, we dispose. So the circular economy, it is a unique design for economic development that we try to address the businesses, like logistics, and then social, like inclusiveness, as mentioned by William, and of course, the environment. So, case in point that in the most pressing environmental issue now these days is climate change. And would you believe that the sector of transport, primarily the logistics, contributes between 24 to 30% in one way or another from one country to another. And there's an opportunity for that to reduce it because the target now these days is actually we need to make a net zero carbon by 2050. Why? Because come by 2050, if we are still doing business as usual, the climate change is irreversible. Our target is to maintain it at 2 degrees Celsius increase, as much possible, below 1.5. But if it's business as usual, it will increase to 3 degrees Celsius. What will happen then? So the polar and the Arctic region, the ice there will be melt. So a small island like Philippines will be probably by the time will be half instead of 7,000 island, will be 3,500. Then the European countries or the Western country will be the tropical. And the Philippines will be, a desert for that matter and will be having a problem in natural resources. So the circular economy is trying to address first the reduction or avoidance of waste and pollution. Second, to make the materials and products that we are using to be in use, not going out to the environment. And of course, the last one is to let our ecosystem or our environment regenerate. So in the application of logistics or transport for that matter, even our government, it's become a mandate. So under the nationally determined contribution, transport is one sector that they are looking at. And they call it, from the technical point of view, from the climate language, they call it Scope 3. So perhaps you are familiar with Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. And logistics is actually supply chain that we need to reduce it through life cycle assessment. And the application of making it more circular is that addressing the triple bottom line, the businesses, economics, the social, and the environment. So case in point that the practice of past logistics is an application of a circular economy by which they're the ones providing a service to a small sari-sari store, and that provides inclusiveness, make it social justice for that matter. In the same time, because for sure, you have an upgraded technology when it comes to transport and with all this digitalization and so on and so forth, you make and lower your footprint when it comes to greenhouse gases emission using Euro 4 trucks and so on and so forth. Especially, I'm not quite sure at this point in time if you can extend it to up to managing the waste. The food that you distribute is actually consumable, but the packaging is non-biodegradable, and you cannot bring it, and our environment cannot absorb it. So there are two things in circular economy that when we talk about the materials and goods. One is the biological material, the other one is the technical material. The biological material, once you consume it, you throw it to the environment, it could easily regenerate to the environment. So, but the technical materials like metal, plastics, or waste for that matter, once you throw it to the environment, it cannot be, biodegrade and merge with the natural ecosystem. So the idea is that you have to manage this. So using the application of circular economy, that extending the life of the product, making it recycled, reuse, refurbish for that matter. So in the case of fast logistics, I think they are there already, and they could further step it. And who drives on it? Government, consumer, your clients. Case in point that the application of the Philippines, they have enacted the Extended Producers Responsibility Law, trying to address the waste primarily on plastics packaging. In one way or another, the likes of Nestle, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, so on and so forth, they will require you in one way or another as part of the value chain to recover this packaging. You will become part of their EPR process. So coming up and adapting into a circular economy would now, more than just fashion or state of the art of a company, it will become a demand in a very near future. Thank you.
Yes, the question will be is, are we here in the Philippines ready to do that or willing to do that as well? It's quite a challenge to try and implement. Taking a step outside of the Philippines, Melvi, your research work at IDC, right, is on sustainability and ESG in the APAC region. What trends are you seeing in the market?
Actually, before I answer that, maybe I'll answer that question and also add to what is already said by some of the panelists here with me. So just to share that I'm doing research on the Asia Pacific level. So recently, we always do like these monthly surveys. And one of the survey data that really fascinated me recently is that they're saying that around 73% of companies in Asia Pacific just started on their sustainability journey. So 73%. And the most fascinating part of that, I checked because I have to attend this event. 73% is the average, but transportation and logistics is 88%. So it's very unfortunate that I can't break it down to the level of the Philippines. But that is the trend that we're seeing right now. So there are a couple of things that is pushing this phenomenon. Why are companies suddenly thinking of sustainability? So in the Philippine context, and anyway, in the Asia Pacific context, there are 4 things. So it could be mission, which is basically business ethos. If the company is a sustainability is part of their brand. Or if you have somebody like William in your team, who's leading your company, who has a vision on the importance of sustainability in the continuity and the business growth of their business. The other one is policies. You mentioned about policies, June. So it's the rules and regulations that we have to live by. The third one is business value. So this is where I think most professionals want to understand it's about competition. Staying on top of your competition, making sure that your profits is not just now, you can actually earn profits in the future. So, and the other driving factor is your customers. They are sometimes asking you, what am I buying? Is this a sustainable product? Who are you? Are you a sustainable partner? Are you a sustainable business? So all of these 4 things is actually driving sustainability in Asia Pacific. In the Philippines in particular, I would say that it's a combination of all 4, a bit more on the mission side, when it's being driven by the leadership that sees the importance of sustainability. The other part of it is regulation. You mentioned the extended producers responsibility law. That's the recent one in January. But there's another law that's actually affecting us right now. It was executed in 2019. So 2019 law actually, it's not a law actually. It's more of it's more of a ruling by the SEC and the PSE for the biggest company in the Philippines to start reporting their sustainability plans with their annual financial statement. We're all business people here, right? So one is the one requirement to stay in business in the Philippines. You have to submit your annual financial statement. So now what the PSE and the CSE are saying, you don't have to submit just your annual financial statement. We need you to tell us how sustainable are you. So if you do not submit this report with your annual financial statement in your SEC, you are considered incomplete submission. What does that mean? Penalties and fines. So we understand it in that way. So that's actually also urging these big companies to take up sustainability. The other part is more on market-driven side. So actually, you're a logistic company. If you're working with I would always say that if you're in the logistic business, you're in the middle economy. If you are serving companies that is probably, if you think you're outside of the Philippine market, other Asian markets are important to you, Europe is important to you, the USA is important to you, you need to be thinking about how can I be more sustainable? Because your customers there are already starting to add in their procurement decisions. Who am I working with? Sustainability, not just a price factor. They're no longer going to ask people now in Asia Pacific region, what's your price point? That's no longer just the decision factor. They're already asking, are you sustainable? What are you doing in terms of sustainability? So this type of appreciation, I think, Dr. Raymond, is not yet that well known in the Philippines, mainly because I'm not sure, maybe it's the lack of information as well, but this is what's happening outside of our country. So it's something that I think needs to be considered by everyone in the room. And sorry, I'm already talking too long, but anyway.
No, I think a lot of good information, but just touching on what you said. So you said the 4 drivers would be mission, policy, business value, and customers. And you say that in the Philippines, the 2 major drivers is mission and policy. Did I hear you correctly?
I would say that it's more of mission and customer, business value. I mean, the level of competition as well as customer demand.
Okay.
There is an impact in policy, but in reality, I've studied the Asia Pacific region, right? Our laws is a little bit behind compared to the Asia Pacific neighbors. But it doesn't mean that it will stay that way, to be honest, because with the extended producers law, it actually just signals that our government is looking into policies that can better address sustainability. So that's just the first step.
But it's not policy driven yet. It's still exploratory.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not yet. We're not yet there. It could be
Got it.
actually, to be honest, I have a feeling it could be that our government is busy with a lot of things. There's a lot of things that we need to fix in the economy. We can just start. Sustainability is not just about waste. It's also a question of renewable green energy. That's a very major issue here in this country. So the government now is maybe focusing more on making our grid green, but also now with the EPR law is also considering the waste one. And just to say, the way I see the EPR law affecting all of us, right now they're looking at plastics, right? But the poster child of the EPR law is Taiwan. And the degree of what they're actually tracking there is more than just plastic. They're asking everybody, the business sector, to track the components, the high-value components, whether that's e-waste, that's the laptops that you use in your offices, mobile phones. They're trying to break down what can be recovered from there. So it's that sophisticated. And so the ASEAN group is already looking at Taiwan and seeing, okay, what else can we copy in our economy? And if you think that's far off, just look at Vietnam. They just applied that level of policy in EPR. It was effective, I think, last year. It was made a law last year and effective this year.
So Norman, coming back to you, in supply chain management within our organizations, there's a lot of priorities, right? Probably the main priority is profitability, then it's customer service. So how do you drive sustainability and still meet supply chain performance measures?
Sure, that's where I'd like to break the perception. It doesn't need to be a separate track. You don't need to buy or to use biofuel suddenly. I mean, the moment you wake up, you became sustainable. You don't need to have a drastic reduction in plastic. You can start with what you have. Driving supply chain excellence makes sense. Case in point, everyone wants to reduce costs. Means reducing costs, you avoid air freight, you optimize your containers, you optimize your truck, you optimize your transport. All of those, hey, they all drive carbon emission reduction as well. Meaning, if you go sea freight, you spend this much amount of carbon footprint. If you go air freight, you know you spend 30 times the amount of carbon. That's a very, very close parallel to cost. So it's the same effort and output that you have to do. Same thing for net working capital or cash. Inventory. It's a supply chain stream to reduce inventory, make your supply chain lean. At the same time, if you do that, it means also you don't need to overproduce. You spend less on manufacturing. And more importantly, you don't need to scrap aging products, which is a throwaway. And then finally, I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time,
No problem.
an unheralded supply chain performance measure is employee engagement. We have sometimes the most employees in the organization. So even keeping your employees engaged impacts the carbon emission. Making them use automated tools, less overtime, more focus. It means less energy that they have to spend in the offices, less electricity usage, and eventually resulting to less carbon footprint. So it's the same track, but it's not enough, really. There still needs to be a transformation beyond that, but I'm saying it's a good start.
So it doesn't and should not be treated as a separate activity, and it should also be a holistic view.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Now, I promised the audience earlier that the Henrik's panel, I see Henrik has left the room. Henrik's panel didn't answer all their questions, but I promised that our panel would. Okay? So let's look at some of the questions that we have. What should be the benchmark target that should be hit to be able to offset the CO2 emissions? I know the first part of the question was talking about fast, but I think it's a question for anyone in the panel here. What should be the benchmark or target that we should hit? Who wants to take that?
I get the hot seat. I'll be very straightforward. I have no answer to this question today. Yes, I read about it, but no, we do not have any blueprint on this. I'll explain why. We have initially focused on our warehouses. These are within our direct control. Where do we think the biggest CO2 emissions will come from? Obviously from the transportation side. This is practically outsourced by our group. But learning from, again, this is not something I have not heard about, but candidly, I think we will have these measurements in about 2 years' time. We have a program today where we are starting in areas where we have control. So so the whole thing about CO2, unfortunately, I do not have the answer. In fact, I think Norman has more quantifications already on the emissions by your typical trucks, buses, ships, and airplanes.
William, I appreciate your candor, and I deal with some of the largest logistics companies in the world and airlines, and very frankly, they don't have a target either. They want to look at it, they're trying to look at it, but they don't have a solution either. If someone in the audience doesn't agree with that statement, I'll be happy to hear your input or feedback. No? Yes, sir.
Sorry, Jun, if I may go first. But there is a global target. By 2050, it needs to be net zero. And then companies would incrementally or maybe drastically approach that. So I've come across different organizations who want to achieve 50% by 2030 against your 1990 levels. Now, the challenge is measuring carbon emission or CO2 emission. I think most of the shippers, they have some capability, but the guy that executes in the ground, it's not yet embedded in our thinking. For every task that you do, you get +5 CO2 or -10 CO2. That's not yet there. That's why it's a bit difficult to quantify how far you are in the journey.
Yeah, and And I think just to add to that, especially when you talk about scope 3 as a shipper, right? How many of us actually, yes, we understand net zero by 2050, but how do we go about doing that? That roadmap or that pathway or the way to do it, I think we're still quite unclear about it.
The strategies are there, but again, quantifying which of the strategies have the biggest bump is difficult. That's the strategies is where we drive competency and awareness, step 1. Then you do green logistics. Then you do green packaging. And then in parallel, you do tools and measurement implementation. But in that, then there's a lot of technical projects that you have to run. But you're right, it's at the strategy level. It's still a long journey, but I hope we go there, or we get there.
So, remember our promise? No, I'm not going to let you speak, Melvi, because you talk too much. I'm just joking. No, but this is what we're going to do. We just got a 10-minute guide from our timekeeper here. We've got 12 more questions to go. So each question is 1 minute. Starting with, we've actually already answered this. Let's go to the next one. A perceived roadblock is lack of government support for sustainability initiatives. I'm going to throw this one to you, June. Outside of the new ESG rules, which policy should the government promote to further sustainable supply chains? 60 seconds. Go.
Yeah. Well, actually, the government is in the forefront of promoting sustainability, among others. In fact, the government committed 75% reduction of our emission. Case in point that they divided it into 5 sectors to include transport as one of those. Agriculture, transport, energy. We have these. I think the other one is the energy consumption, for that matter. So now, also the government came up with a policy through the National Economic Development Authority. They call it the PAPCOR SCP, or Philippine Action Plan for Sustainable Consumption and Production, by which greening the supply chain is one of those. Likewise, the Security and Exchange Commission requires now the companies that are into IPO already, that they are required to have a sustainability reporting, and perhaps you have heard about the GRI and other sustainability reporting. So yeah, and it provides, actually now these days it became domino effect, that each and every supply chain of these big companies now these days is actually shaping up. They are at a level of capacity building at this point in time. Like us here, some of you may not be quite familiar with the different terminologies like circular economy, net zero, and so on and so forth. So, case in point that in the case of past logistics, they are there already. They are in fact doing some activities related on the reduction, but they must be measured, as mentioned earlier. And to do that you have to do a baseline scenario. And a baseline scenario is that how logistics works. So that will be the baseline scenario. And if you are, for instance, they have already introduced solar panel in their warehouses, that can be a reduction. And eventually, that can also be a future business, because this carbon thing is a commodified already. It's part of that you can sell it now these days. So they started with the forest carbon, by having offsetting. The airline industry now these days, they are actually catching up with carbon offsetting by buying forest carbon, for that matter. In the same thing that right now it's in a waste management, you can do a waste management offsetting, or plastic offsetting, for that matter. And a reverse logistics can also be applied in your case. Thank you.
Thank you, June. There was a question for fast logistics. It disappeared. But my suggestion...
that person can look for Gladys. That is a very specific question. Yes, we have it. Please look for Gladys. Or they're in this table over here. That was for a very specific business question.
Or go to the fast logistics booth.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Yes.
That's an even smarter answer. Thank you.
So go to the fast logistics booth. It was Cebu or Davao, whether you have a service there. All right. This one, I think actually, Norman has already answered this. Yeah? It shouldn't be separate. It should be all-encompassing. Your supply chain strategy should include sustainability. So what should companies focus on first that can have the biggest impact? Yeah, good question. Who wants to take that?
My answer to that will depend on your type of company. So just going back to to everything that Norman and William were saying earlier, and the question of what is the target to meet the sustainability goal, actually it depends on your organization. So you first need to understand how your business...
Try this. What should a logistics company start on, right? If you're able to answer that. And what should, say, a manufacturer focus on?
Well, for logistics, it should be transportation. That's the biggest chunk of your operations. That's where your CO2 will probably be coming from. From manufacturing sides is energy. And on the policy side, the policy question earlier, what is needed here is support mechanism for MSMEs to adopt sustainability.
Thank you, Melvi. Next question. Can you give your insights or share some of the best practices in line on reverse logistics and slob management to be more sustainable and robust? You want to take that, June?
Yeah, I'll probably talk about SLOB or streamlined logistics. So going back to fewer trucks on the road, you would be able to shape the order of your customer so that you end up delivering full truckloads rather than an empty truck. Now, it's called streamlined because it's not only the shipper that gains from it, it's also the customer. So that's where you share the savings of that. I mean, all in all, it's reduction in CO2, but it's also reduction in cost. So you streamline both of your costs and then you streamline your logistics. At the same time, part of streamlined logistics is sharing inventory information. That's critical also because it's typically not for free. So you put that in a contract that your customer should share your inventory information. You have your own inventory information. And then from there decide, are we already operating at a lean inventory or are we excess or in excess? And from there, you go back to your demand planning, to your forecasting, and correct everything. And eventually, you end up with a much, much lower working capital, less risk of scrapping. So that's where you apply the principles of streamlined logistics in driving sustainability.
Thank you very much, Norman. I think, June, you've already answered this. You know, you talked about quite a fair few policies.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah? And of course, June is going to be standing here right in front of us after the presentation for you to ask him more questions on that. We'll go on to the next one. We've got 2 minutes left. How can logistics companies support the circular economy? Isn't that just for manufacturing? I think you also kind of addressed it as well. Yes. Yes. That's an easy way to get through questions. Huh? We just say we've answered it. Wow. We have been talking about sustainability here. Can you please discuss what is sustainability? Melvi, I'm going to ask you to answer this, but strictly 60 seconds. Reinforce what sustainability is, because we've been talking about it for the last half an hour, but just reinforce it to answer that question. 60 seconds or less. Now.
Sustainability is environment, social, people, your community, and the way you run your business.
Okay. Pass, fail. How about nuclear energy as a solution to reducing carbon footprint?
Okay, I just had this discussion with the industry group in energy. It depends on actually, because there's a social implication. Again, sustainability is not just about environment, it has a social implication.
So, you know, on that topic, a few months ago, I spoke to a shipping line, so like an Evergreen or a Maersk, a shipping line that is looking at deploying nuclear-powered vessels. And their argument was very, very good. It's using, I'm not a scientist, it's fission nuclear technology. So apparently 70% of the waste, the nuclear waste, can be reused compared to conventional nuclear propulsion. So you've got nuclear submarines, right? Americans have nuclear submarines. This is deploying nuclear-powered container vessels. And they are going to go out there to look for seed funding. But very interesting. And the Logistics Society told them that when they're further down this path, and in working with the Port of Rotterdam, which is one of our partners, we'd be very keen to publicize this technology, not to promote it, but just to make the market aware. Because, you know, we all know that 95% of the world's products move by ocean. So nuclear-powered ships that are sustainable, right, is quite an interesting concept that we'd like to know more about and help promulgate awareness of for further discussion.
Safety and security.
Sorry?
Yeah. We're having our own discussion
Okay.
with regards to nuclear.
I'll punish both of you and make you stand in the corner if you all don't behave. Okay. So what are the future trends in sustainability and supply chain management in the Philippines? We kind of answered that. Is this our last question, Machus? Yes. Good. Because this is what I want to do. I want to use that as a takeaway question. Can we have that question again, please, Machus? Oops, there was a new one there.
May target. Meron. May target tayo.
Yes, let's take this as our takeaway question. We are in the Philippines. We've got a Filipino panel. This is going to be your takeaway to sum up this panel session. Starting with yourself, William. What are the future trends in sustainability and supply chain management in the Philippines? And just to add to that, what can we do, or what does Fast Logistics want to do about that?
Yeah, so for us, it's very straightforward. We are a business that's for profit, so most of our sustainability has been iterative. I think going beyond iterative, and we have been working over a year when we started greening our supply chains, where we are now going towards measurability. And I think once we get beyond iterative and measurability, our experience will be one where can we now make a bigger dent and have sustainability profit. That's how we view it, good or bad. But when I say profit, it does not have to be money.
Financial.
So that's our target. And as I had mentioned, I'm happy to note that, again, the biggest challenge lies in transportation because of the carbon engine. But we see so much innovation today. As I told you, we have literally one of our leaders drove the truck for himself, and completely EV truck. We visited 2 or 3 of these already. And then you need to put some practicality to it. But going again beyond iterative and measurability, I think within the next 2 to 3 years, we will have a more robust or quantitative version of something we would then call strategic rather than tactical.
Thank you very much, William. Norman, takeaway message from you.
Sure. I'd say it more in the context of APAC because they have the same trend of thoughts. One, companies will be more engaged from a CSR standpoint. They'd be more visible. Like projects to take care of the mangrove, plant more bamboos. It won't be for show. I'm not saying it was, but it will be more deliberate. Second, many countries will monetize CO2. we're very close to having a real-time measurement of that KPI. And soon, they will equate CO2 with money, which has a different effect on our mindset.
And it hurts our wallet, yeah?
Yes. And then finally, for a logistics standpoint, maybe more of a wish rather than what I see as a trend, but our transport or the transport that we use will be using renewable energy, electric vehicles, biofuels, and other sources of energy. And then the packaging that we use will be of green packaging, less of single-use plastics. The paper that we use will be made of recycled pulp, not virgin pulp. And companies will be more and more cautious and sensitive of driving them. That's what I see as the trend and more of also of a wish.
Thank you, Norman. Melvi, your parting thoughts, comments.
The trends that I see is the sustainability challenge will actually push the supply chain and the sector in the Philippines to go more digital, to actually be more similar to what fast logistics is now, to be more digital as well as collaborative. So that is a trend that I'm seeing because of sustainability.
Thank you, Melvin. June,
Okay.
bring us home.
Well, sustainability challenge in the Philippines is actually there's no way out but to go in that direction. Otherwise, we will be left behind. And I agree with our co-panelists here that, well, technology is very important, digitalization, to provide competitiveness for that matter. And on the other hand, the opportunity is quite large in terms of logistics because carbon dioxide or CO2 can be commodified now these days. For as long as you would be able to determine and define a good methodology for counting your carbon footprint for that matter, and with the pre-market outside, it's like a stock market, you can sell your carbon. And there's a prohibitive price on it. And you will be surprised that can be faster income as well for you to engage. Case in point, in energy sector, they are now starting on it. More than just selling their fuel, they are also selling carbon offsetting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, June. So I think maybe the takeaway here is there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of thinking and thought. We're starting to see some implementation, but still a very, very long way to go. And it's not just at the strategic level, it needs to be operationalized and maybe tactically implemented within our supply chains. But I think we are quite serious about getting there. It's not just greenwashing, or it's just not, media, pandering to the media. Yeah, we're actually quite serious about it. And maybe something that Norman said that's quite useful for us to bear in mind. It should not be treated separately. Sustainability should be part of our approach on how we want to run out and manage our supply chains. And that's the only way it's going to work. And maybe something that William said, just to re-emphasize that, it needs to address the wallet as well, right? It's not just sustainability for sustainability's sake, but if it's not the wallet, then it's also, I like what you said at the start, William, about our future and giving back and making sure that future generations actually have a 7,600 islands to play on and not 3,000 in the desert. So, yeah, a lot has been done, a lot more to do, and it needs to be translated out there. So with that, I'd like to thank my panelists. Excellent panel session. Thank you very much.